many sheets?
2. That's how you flow.
Oh, okay, cool.
Probably like background and stuff. So 3, I guess.
Okay.
If you're flow fancy. Keep a lot of paper.
Okay.
Everyone ready? We state an affirmation of resolve the U.S. federal government should ban hydraulic fracturing. For some definitions, ban means officially prohibit. Hydraulic fracturing is forcing open of fissure in subterranean rock with liquid at high pressure using oil or gas. Because of the word, all the definitions are contextual. We reserve the right to clarify throughout the round. If our opponents have any questions, feel free to ask. Because of the word should, it's a policy round. Thus, the plan is the United States federal government should ban hydraulic fracturing through normal ways and means and as soon as possible.
Policy round because there's an actor giving an action.
Oh, okay. It's a policy round because there's an actor giving an action. Okay, so so if there have any questions, we feel free to clarify. In the weighing mechanism, through normal ways and means, as soon as possible. The weighing mechanism for today's round is net benefits, and structural violence under net benefits is going to want to come first. That's how the round should be weighed. Okay, moving on to our advantage 1 about natives. Subpoint A is the uniqueness. First, Trump repealed an Obama-era fracking rule that required oil and gas companies on public and tribal lands to disclose what chemicals they were using during the drilling process, meaning that this law no longer exists that they have to disclose this. So little A under this has also created safeguards against groundwater contamination by improving well infrastructure and requiring wastewater to be stored in tanks instead of pits. Second of all, southeast New Mexico has highest concentration of fracking sites. So the little A under this, it falls near the Navajo Nation Indian Reservation, the Pueblo of Zuni, the Pueblo of Laguna, and the Mescalero Reservation. Third, we see that EPA, according to an EPA report, hydraulic fracturing for oil and gas states that hydraulic fracturing activities can impact drinking water resources under some circumstances. The little A under this is times of low water availability is when it can be affected. The little B under this is spills during handling of hydraulic fracturing fluids. The little C is discharge of inadequately treated hydraulic fracturing wastewater to surface water. So fourth, we see that the BBC report on February 2017 that 16% of hydraulically fractured oil and gas wells spill liquids every year. And then fifth, we see in North Dakota, 67% of the spills were recorded where a lot of native reservations are. Sixth, in northern Arizona, Trump just auctioned off 7,200 acres of land for oil and gas development. The little A under this is 90% of new oil and gas wells on public lands are fracked. The little B is BLM foregoing tribal constellations. The little C is would pollute groundwater in a little Colorado River basin. So the subpoint B is the links. We see that fracking would be banned, and so it would make it so that there could be absolute no possibility for any of the uniqueness that's happening right now to occur. So the little C under this is the internal link. So there's going to be sovereignty increasing for natives' concerns are actually listened to. Second, we see that there's no water pollution occurring from fracking because it will no longer be possible, especially it won't be near these vital water sources. Third, no drilling on native land will be allowed to happen where it's primarily happening right now in the status quo. So the subpoint D under this is the impacts. So first of all, we're going to see structural violence is going to be decreasing. The little A is the murder rates of Native American women are up to 10% times higher right now. Yeah.
The key part is that when we're not listening to natives and we're not treating them as actual people, that lets these structural violence.
Okay, so when we're not thinking of them as we treat the rest of citizens of America and we don't consider what they actually want, it causes the structural violence to go on unchecked. We don't view natives as people. Second of all, there's going to be decreased harms from water pollution, which means that the overall quality of life is going to increase in the overall health care of people, because when people are drinking polluted water, it makes it so that they're more susceptible to diseases and they get sick a lot more especially from the contaminants that are remaining in this water. And third, there's going to be an increasing control of native land, which is really good for the sovereignty and the human rights of the individuals living on these reservations. Okay, so advantage 2 is about the environment. Subpoint A is the links, is the uniqueness. We see that 4% of chemicals escape into the air during extraction, according to Investopedia. Second of all, 40% of water used for fracking returns to the ground with toxic contaminants, meaning that since this, look to our uniqueness points about how they Trump overturned Obama's ban on and so that they don't have to store the water after fracking properly, meaning the water is being released back into water sources after being used for fracking with the contaminants remaining into it. Third, we see that oil spills are higher with fracking plants versus other ways that we use to source oil. Fourth, fracking makes it so all oil demand is met constantly, but this is bad because it makes it so that that the United States especially is more reliant on oil and gas. We see that 67% of how we get our oil and gas is coming from fracking according to Sightline. Fifth, we see that 40 to 140 billion gallons of water was used in 2010 to fracture wells. Currently, the U.S. has been planning to add 35,000 wells a year, according to Greenpeace. Sixth, we see in Texas, there's no law for lining fracking fluid pits to prevent spillage, and the nation as a whole has no overall law saying that there's regulations for how we deal with the contaminants. Seventh, we see that 1 to 2% of earthquakes have been caused by fracking. So even this might seem like a really small percentage, but considering the entire United States and that a lot of even small earthquakes, but to really large ones happen all the time. According to earthquake research, the government thing for researching earthquakes, this is really terrible, especially since it's near these native reservations where they don't have as much money and it's hard to bounce back after an earthquake can destroy your home. So subpoint B is the links. First of all, we see there's a decreased use of fossil fuels. Second of all, there's a decreased use of toxic chemicals being emitted from the fracking process. So subpoint C is the internal links. People transition to more renewable energies because we get rid of the main source so that people are getting their energy from. Second of all, there's an increase in health without the use of this because there's less emissions from fracking. Third, we see that there's an increased safety of water. Fourth, there's a decrease in CO2 emissions. So moving on to subpoint D, which is the impacts. First, we see there's a decrease in effects of climate change. So when this happens, there's going to be an overall, it will delay the effects and will take away one of the largest things that's contributing to climate change. So there's going to be an increase in health and an increase in biodiversity, which is crucial to animal and human existence. And second of all, there's an increase in use of green energy, which will overall increase our economy and increase the amount of jobs, as well as transition away from one of the worst things for our environment when there is a brink scenario here, because we see that climate change impacts are getting worse and worse. So we need to start to transition to something that can help sustain human and animal existence on Earth. Thank you.
All right, order is going to be one-off. Framework turns on a new sheet. Their case in order.
Sorry, can you say that again? That was kind of unclear.
One-off. Framework turns on a new sheet, and then your case in order. The off is going to be long, so okay. Just let me know if I'm being unclear, but the first part's slow. Starting time. Once, strong Joe, a man, fell into a dream, and there was a butterfly, self-content in accord with its intentions. It did not know about a Jow. With a sudden awakening, there was fully and completely a Jow. One does not know if a Jow dreams and there is a butterfly, or whether a butterfly dreams and there is a Jow. When there is a Jow and a butterfly, there must be a distinction between them. This is called the changing of things. Framework. First argument is that reality is illusory. Asymple means that we perceive reality through our experiences, but we do not know which one is the one. Which one is actually us as a human, and which one is the butterfly that's dreaming. We could all be a dream. We could all be a dream of one butterfly. For all we know, we will never be able to prove that. And this is the actual reality that we're living in. B simple is a role playing a policymaker and useless unless in a reality that is fundamentally illusory, which means that only spiritual suffering should be considered in this round. Second argument is that what exactly is spiritual suffering? Well, suffering is relative. Okay. Second argument is that I'll take it now actually. Yeah.
What do you mean by we're all one butterfly?
No, okay, the story of the Jow, right? We could be all living in a dream of one butterfly that's living somewhere, right? You can't prove that that's not true. So you have to first prove that this is the reality that we're living in. Okay. Second argument is that suffering is relative. The A subpoint is that material suffering is predicated on our past experiences. If lying is the worst possible death, if dying the worst possible death, then is it the worst thing that we can experience? Then it will seem like the worst suffering. But so will stomachache if that's the worst thing that we've actually experienced. This is empirically proven with studies on babies.
Clear.
This is empirically proven with studies on babies. The B subpoint is that material suffering is caused by desire, which means that so long as we are conscious and we must desire, which means that material suffering is inevitable. The C subpoint is on spiritual suffering. Committing spiritual suffering means that you are not one with the doubt and will never accept material suffering death. Spiritual suffering comes as a result of desiring in material change. I'll take it at the bottom of the framework. Third argument is that biological death is not real. It's fundamentally a double binary. Either it's a losing consciousness, in which case you die every time you go to sleep, or it's cellular death, in which case you're dying every time and there's no marginal death impact. The A subpoint is that death should not be feared. It is only another state of reality, just like Job's dream. The B subpoint is that death is inevitable, unpredictable, which means that we should not try to shape the inevitable. The fourth argument is that panpsychism is real. Everything is interconnected and has a consciousness. The A subpoint is that Maslov shows that paranegosis constitutes a space anomaly that can only explain a space anomaly that can only explain if everything had a consciousness. The B subpoint is that there is no limit to consciousness. So when the butterflies share a single consciousness, just like we all share consciousness. The subpoint is that the Tao state. The C subpoint is that the Tao state is in existence, one and unified with the Tao, able to comprehend different states of being and eliminate suffering. Yeah, I'll take a question.
What are these experiments or these studies on babies that you listed in like the fifth point?
I mean, they're like studies done by doctors. I don't know the exact name of the studies. Sorry.
But like, what did the studies?
Oh, the studies say that like babies react to like getting like a stomach ache similarly as someone like has the same amount of pain as someone who is suffering like extraordinary like stomach aches. The fifth argument is that the role of the judge. The role of the judge is to take on the role of the Tao sage. The role of the judge is to take on the role of the Tao sage. You guys probably don't know what that means, so I'll explain. So basically, you can try to view all these states of existence of life, like life, death, dreams, everything, as just spokes on a wheel. And you just view it from a bird's eye perspective and view all of them equally. Okay. These six arguments, the role of policy making is bad. The first argument is that it creates ontological violence when we are forced to role play as a presence and role play things that create spiritual suffering. When it creates ontological violence, we have to role play things that create ontological spiritual suffering. The second argument is that this traps epistemology. Sorry. Oh. On the links. First link is the fear of death. The ace one is that the affirmative tries to secure the boundary of life into something stable and calm that will never be able to change. Specifically, they talk about earthquakes and climate and things like climate change that will never be able to actually change, but they try to present their affirmative as a solution to all these things. Second argument is the state is an immeasurable power. You try to take your own individual agency as a person to be able to become the Tao and instead shift it up towards the state, which means that this is fundamentally opportunity cost. The third argument is that policy making makes us think of like this one good thing that they present as this is going to be a solution to all these things, but we will never be able to actually achieve it, which means that you create a desire within ourselves to ban all fracking, but we will never be able to do that as high school students. What that means is that it actually creates spiritual suffering within us, but does not solve for actual material suffering. The fourth argument is that they link the state of nature to the fear of death. This is going to be incredibly harmful, because by discussing their safety as interaction with the world around them, the fear of death, and they epistemically link nature as something to be feared and as an enemy, and to be able to control this and control all of nature and all of nature's functions. So specific examples, they talk about things like earthquakes and spillover, things that will inevitably happen, and they try to control all these things. And they view nature as something to be exploited or salvaged, even if it is neither. It is just another state of existence. Also, this leads to things like, like the World Wildlife Fund just focusing on pandas instead of actually saving things that we can't save. Also, the sixth advantage is basically entirely reformed. The United States has never been able to be kind to natives in the past, which means that their affirmative plan is fundamentally charity cannibalism and also creates spiritual suffering within ourselves because we created a desire that will never be able to be attained like sovereignty. In fact, first argument is that death is irrelevant. The A subpoint is that fear of death is the only thing because it creates this union of spiritual suffering within ourselves. The B subpoint is that reincarnation is real. Ian Stevenson conducted a study on 3,000 different individuals and found that the only way that they had memories that they had was if reincarnation was real. This probably takes out death as the largest impact. Second argument is that spiritual suffering outweighs material suffering. The A subpoint is that you will infinitely reincarnate into terrible life if your spiritual suffering is not balanced. The B subpoint is that solving spiritual suffering is a prerequisite to solving material suffering. A couple examples later on the impact sheet. Third argument is that fear of death creates securitized violence because we feared Iraq might have WMDs and we actually invaded Iraq as a result and caused massive amounts of suffering. The fourth argument is that spiritual suffering creates real repression. The A subpoint is toxic masculinity. When we try to become the most manliest man, we create toxic masculinity with ourselves. The B subpoint is that material desires for gaining all these resources creates ecological destruction, which means that the affirmative is only playing whack-a-mole with the impacts that are happening in the real world. The alt, vote negative to embrace non-presence in the face of presence. Vote negative to embrace non-presence in the face of presence. Yeah. There you go, right. So basically, this means that just like the judge views the round from a bird's eye perspective, you also view all the states of life, we as debaters, we as the people in surround, view all the states of life as just spokes on a wheel, and we are sitting at the hub and just view everything equally. Yeah.
What's the status here?
Oh yeah, unconditional. Well, so let's see. First argument is by being at the center of the hub, then you can accept all the different states of life, not just us being able to live a comfortable life, but you can accept all facets of life and all facets of death and all facets in between these two experiences, which means that you also solve back for fear of death. The second argument is that nature is able to solve for all these. For example, Santa Monica fires, the fires that we had back in November, right? All these things were incredibly devastating, but what happened after was that in just a few weeks, we had already had massive amounts of plants regrowing here. Also things like Oklahoma earthquakes, right? Oklahoma earthquakes destroyed massive amounts of agriculture, but the land refilled in and created new, more beautiful things in its place. The third argument is that discourse solves. The negatives of performance that allows us to consider different, that demonstrates ponderance for different states of life, and because this is recorded and is probably going to be shared with a bunch of people, and this is the TOC with different spectators in the room, this probably demonstrates that the negative actually creates dialogue and Taoism, which means that voting for us actually sparks real change and spreads this ideology further. However, because fiat is illusory, nothing happens when you vote for the affirmative, so you vote negative on a marginal solvency argument. Fourth argument is that you don't vote for any of the perms. Eighth point is that voting on a perm takes attention away from the core of the negative advocacy, which means that you got solvency. The B subpoint is that perms also do not shield the link because the speech acts are binding and the one I see, they're also always going to be advocating for policy making, so you always have that link. The C subpoint is that the affirmative is fundamentally state action, which is incompatible with viewing ourselves as the hub of every state of existence. The D subpoint is that the perm is another relink into decay because they're just trying to salvage the sinking ship of the one I see, another desire. I'm going to be, Also, the fifth argument is that this is the TOC, which means that the norms that we read in these rounds are going to be the norms that we have in other rounds. Because, like, for example, Nueva reading Skep last year caused a bunch of people to just start discussing skepticism. This means that in every round of the TOC, especially in outer rounds, should be a method debate. They prefer the team with a better method. Couple framework impacts. In couple frameworks. First argument is vampirism. Policymaking makes us have some sort of sick joy when we hear bad news because it means that the uniqueness on our dissets are going to be a lot tighter or whatever, which means that policymaking actually makes us feel joy when we hear stories of suffering, which actually guts our ability to actually do different things. The second argument is that we outsource agency. We prevent interchanges towards Taoism when we give our agency up to the state. The order?
I'm gonna get there.
Yeah.
We're just gonna do after order and negative order.
No, okay.
And where does the framework sheet fall in there?
So like 2 points they gave at the bottom would just be on the bottom again.
Okay.
Or wait, do you mean the app framework or the neg framework terms?
The app framework
App framework is just gonna be on top.
of the app.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
The app exactly as read in order, the neg exactly read as in order as read, yeah. Alright, anyone not ready?
Nope.
Alright, first, extend across that you should be preferring net benefits with a structural balance versus 3 arguments to the times. First, we see that net benefits and like looking at the impact in the round is going to be like the best way to divide ground in this round. When we're seeing that like they're going under a framework that's like entirely different, they're completely mooting the 1AC and like not looking at this entirely. Like you should be preferring our framework, one because and also, like, they didn't make any response on the app case, so basically, like, ignoring the entirety of that. Secondly, we see that when we're preferring, like, we're looking at structural violence. First, we look at not only one, like, the actual impacts that happen to people and, like, what actually, like, materially occurs to them, but secondly, we also look at, like, what concerns the people, like, who are being affected by, like, the different, like, plans and the different occurrences in the world. Also, they didn't make any response to the fact that this would be a policy round is designated by the fact that there is an actor given in the resolution committee, like, doing some sort of action. And we should be preferring like what the framers of the resolution were thinking, because that ensures that we actually have people to like write these topics and actually ensures we have like NC sort of education around. We were literally just like talking in the league board meeting about how there weren't enough people to like write topics, so we need to be like preferring like we need to be going with what the intent of the resolution of the framer was, and that's pretty obvious from based like on how the resolution was framed. Okay, so on the natives advantage, extend across like impacts here about how like there's structural violence to natives, the murder rates, and the water pollution. There's also a spiritual impact here. We see that natives have like a really deep connection to the land, and when we're like literally taking their land away from them and having it used for other purposes, that is also like a spiritual suffering right there. So even if you like buy their framework about spiritual suffering, we're still operating under that, especially because like their spiritual like framework is kind of ignoring like the spiritual like beliefs of like native people and stuff that like the that we've been completely ignoring for like centuries, and so the 1NC is also ignoring that as well. So, and then on advantage 2 about environment extend across, like our impacts about climate change and about renewable jobs, we see that like even if there is some sort of like spiritual suffering occurring, people like aren't acknowledging that spiritual suffering, but they're specifically acknowledging like the fact that like they can't eat food or anything like that. And so we need to be referring those impacts first, because that's what like the majority of people like are thinking about when they don't like just kind of sit around like on the ground thinking about like a butterfly. All right, moving on to decay. Okay, so first on framework, they say that we like can't perceive reality, and so basically like our material suffering doesn't matter, it's just our spiritual suffering. So first, this is going to be like an ivory tower argument, the whole idea about like someone being able to like theorize about the fact that like a butterfly we could all be living in like the dream of a butterfly allows. That means that that person originally had like food and water and children, was able to kind of like exist in a healthy state of mind in order to like theorize about these possible new ideas. We need to be looking at the like material impacts first in order to like possibly think about spiritual impacts. Yeah.
Yeah, so if we vote F, right, do people actually get food or like shelters?
So the most portable impacts in this round are education, and when we're thinking about like the policies to like propose, and we're thinking about our ability to like actually make change in the government, we need to be analyzing what policies are going to be best. When we're all talking about like how much education is going to be spent in this round, like when people like learn about how like bad fracking is, they're going to be advocating for policies that ban fracking, voting for politicians who like who aren't for fracking, and like we've yeah. All right. So then we're also going to be seeing that they say that like role playing as like a policymaker is going to be like bad for role playing as policymaker is bad. We're going to say that's going to be like the most effective way to make change, and actually like that's how most of the change in our government gets made. And if we're completely ignoring like the policy making system, then we're going to be ceding the political and basically like leaving natives just like at the hands of like the US government, and just like, taking anyone who like doesn't think that like material suffering is a thing like out of this picture. We're not going to be able to like address any sort of like spiritual suffering that's going on. And so then third, there's also an authenticity fetish. You're basically like craving, you're just like fighting consistently for this like perfect spiritual world where you're not suffering it, where you're like completely ignoring material suffering. But that's going to be even like less achievable than just like banning fracking and having this specific key impact where like there isn't water pollution on native land. They say that material suffering is inevitable. They don't give any warrant for this, and we should still be seeing that like having any like decreasing material suffering that hasn't been like brought upon, we should be decreasing material suffering that is specifically caused on a group of people by another group of people. We can at least minimize the material suffering that is unnecessary. A material suffering that just comes out of a habit of nature, sure, might be inevitable. We can still give people like access to clean water. They say that death shouldn't be feared, but we're going to be arguing that death is still going to be like the most final clear-cut impact in this round. And they don't give any analysis why like death doesn't exist and why like people would potentially like reincarnate or anything. So you're gonna be seeing that death is still the most final impact in this round. And sure, while people like know that they're going to die sometime, we should be still like allowing people to like have a fulfilling life. When like humans existence is only just to like think about like what they like to live like some sort of fulfilling life, and they can only do that if they're like literally alive. All right, they say the role of the judge is to be a Taoist sage, and basically they say the role of the judge is to be a Taoist sage, and we're going to be arguing that first, the role of the judge should just be to vote for like the best debater in the round, who advocates a policy and looks at the material impacts of that policy. And then they say that role playing as your oppressor is going to be bad, but we're going to be saying that like there can be like policymakers who aren't necessarily like oppressive. We've seen like Native women who have like been recently like elected to the House of Representatives and to like governorships across the United States, and you're probably not going to argue that like a Native woman is like oppressing themselves by like trying to fight for like the rights of them for their own rights. And again, like you're ignoring like you're ignoring Native spiritual suffering by just going on on this Taoism East Asian like form of beliefs, when we're looking at specifically like what's happening in the United States, and we should be looking at like the belief systems that like the people who are indigenous to this land held. And you're also limiting discussion of the natives through this. Did you have a question?
Oh, no, sorry.
All right. Okay, then on the links, they basically say that, first they say like earthquakes and climate change, that there's these things that happen like inevitably, and like there's just like changes to the environment that continue happening, but the key point here is that we're still going to be decreasing like the part that can be solved. Sure, earthquakes happen, but we can decrease this like 1 to 2% of earthquakes that happen like specifically pushed into native land. And climate change has been like proven to be like the current climate change has been proven to be like man-made, and so we can like eliminate that, or decrease it, yeah.
Okay, so like in the past, whenever a judge votes for the policymaking side, has that ever actually created changes in policy? Can you name one instance in which that has influenced policy?
Yeah, when judges have like voted for like different like gun control laws. We've seen that like a lot of debaters get really active in like gun control movements, something like going to the Capitol, like in Sacramento in order to like fight for this. There's also like never been any like big Taoism movement from like from judges voting for Taoism critiques. All right, so then the next link is they say that like, the state is this immense power, but the only way the state is going to be inevitable, like when people continuously like group together and they've already seen the benefits of the state and seen the benefits for protection and also the benefits for like commerce, there's always going to be some sort of trade of resources between people. So the state's going to be inevitable, and being able to like work within the state is going to be the only way to like take some of that power back. They say then that policymaker then the next one we're going to go to is this charity cannibalism. We're going to be arguing that this is not going to be like a charity. It's literally like we're not like handing money to Native people. We're specifically like making sure that we're not like taking their land away from them and like polluting their water. Yeah. All right, just real quick on the all solvency, we're going to see that there's a few reasons that this isn't going to be solved. First is because, first permanently all we're going to see that you can do the affirmative like in the eyes of like Taoism and acknowledge like the spiritual suffering of people, and it's also going to work better because it's more pragmatic and looks at like the combinations and the interweavings of people's beliefs.
All right. What's the order?
Okay, I'll be covering just the K first in order, and then I'll be covering Ks.
Okay.
So Lennon's the order.
Yeah. With that, I'd like to, wait, sorry. Is everybody ready? Judges ready? Lennon's ready? With that, I'd like to start time now. Go first on the framework. They can see far too much on the ground of the framework here in order for them to adequately read it today. For example, they cover everything about the whole amount of reality being illusory, they say, and essentially, recounting requires a healthy state of mind. We'll give you the examples. We'll give you the example, like, the fact that they do this does not actually contradict the fact that the argumentation against reality being illusory does not actually contradict the fact that reality is illusory. Therefore, we must actually view this realm from a greater perspective in order to best attain the suitable assessment for which round is doing the better debating. If you have a constrained worldview, you cannot achieve a better argumentation. You cannot have a good metric as the Bitcoin team is doing the better argumentation. As their whole realm of ballot and the entire method simply does not make sense in a world where they're only looking at certain proximal parts of everything. Second of all, like they concede everything that we see here on the framework about the whole thing about spiritual suffering and why we should prefer. Their argumentation only here is that like material suffering is predicative to people who learn about Taoism. However, we give you the argumentation that violence is caused by spiritual suffering. The reason that there are people who are oppressing others, who are taking away material conditions from others, and making it so that there's so much suffering in the status quo is because these people spiritually suffer and have the innate desire to do so. If we pass the affirmation action, the people still have the desire. We don't solve for anything. They only still have all the desires for life and for the relative comfort in their life, and there will still exist oppression. If we want to get rid of the oppression, if we want to get it so more people can have better material conditions to adequately learn about Taoism and stop the spiritual suffering, the only way to do so is to take a top-down perspective and make sure that the people who are working in this state will accept the fact that they have their desires and will reject these parts of their thought. Yeah.
Native American oppression results from like the U.S. government taking away land for their own use.
Yeah, land. If we look at the reasons behind why oppression exists, why there are people in the state acting against it, it's because these people, they want money, they want security, they want all these things. The only way to do so is to take a top-down perspective, which goes into the second part about their framework. They say we see the political. No, we're taking a top-down perspective to reform the political. We are reforming the state by changing the very attitude of which people use to adopt what specifically they want and what they should be doing in life. If we stop acting upon our desires, we internalize our and we solve our spiritual suffering, then we get rid of desire and essentially make it so that oppression and the violence against these people can truly and finally end. Theirs is only plotting and reformism to make it. I'm sorry, I have a lot to get through. Their plan exists only as a form of reformism in order to create an illusion that there's change without actually solving for any of the issues that exist. They say that there's like an authenticity fetish in this case. However, the sessions that they make on spiritual suffering being the root cause of everything say that the spiritual suffering is only the true real way to solve in this case. And this whole thing about authenticity is that the only authenticity that can be achieved is if we look at through at the rules of Taoism and get the truth, or else we're only going to be doomed to repeat an infinite cycle of more spiritual suffering and more material suffering because we cannot solve for the factors that actually cause us to be this way. Yes.
Right. So in order for like people to be able to like internalize this Taoism, do they first need to like not work within the state?
Yeah, we cannot give up individual agency in order to the state in order to do so. Additionally, We should not be able to get. It's just we cannot. If you give up individual agency to the state, if we look at the state as a state of being instead of your self-centered being, then we are by definition fighting into the solvency of actually being able to self-system.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that like we're never engaging with the state. It means that we don't pretend that we are the state.
Pretending with the state in general gives up your own solvency and it gives up the solvency of thousands because it gives up our agency. Going out into the framework argumentation, in order to, the whole ivory tower argument can be specified because if you take the side down and say, and if you reduce spiritual suffering, you can make it so more people get access to the argumentation. The rule of objection, they say vote for the best debater. Now again, the fact that they do not account for the full states of reality and the different parts of the reality which we live in, the fact that they don't concede to everything about panpsychism here, means that there is no adequate metric for them to say who exactly is the best objector. They say something about rule of policy making is bad, and they say no, it's rule of policy making good because they're Native American people. And now we give you the American policy decisions are generally bad. We see the U.S. engaging in imperialism. We see the U.S. engaging in all these forms of oppression all across the globe, not just domestically. And we see here that if we do not suffer material and spiritual suffering, and do not suffer spiritual suffering, we can only see these people who are oppressed become the state. They will succumb to the same spiritual suffering we do to the state, and the securitization which makes it so the state inflicts violence upon others. Becoming the state is not a good way to solve for the suffering. We must look at the root cause of the issue, and the only way to do so is to address the spiritual suffering which exists within all of us. Going down into the links. So they say the fear of death, say there's no war on death and reincarnation. We give you the fact that death in itself is a double bind because there's no clear definition of death, then we cannot adequately say what is the boundary of living in itself. It is simply a different state of existence if we can't define specifically what that is. Furthermore, they drop the argumentation on the study conducted 3,000 people saying that reincarnation must exist because of the past philias and phobias that these individuals have had. They say that state is inevitable because the state provides protection and it provides commerce. Now we give you why is it that people are attracted to this protection and commerce? It is because they spiritually suffer. It is because the spiritual suffering leads to these material desires, and that's the only way that the reason that the state's inevitable, that the oppression of the state's inevitable. We must solve for the spiritual suffering if we wish to break this infinite cycle. As such, both the affirmation on this case, they say that
What does spiritually suffering actually mean?
Okay, spiritual suffering is suffering in the incorporeal soul in which it's measured past your reincarnation. Material suffering, whereas is measured by the metrics in your experience as an individual, spiritual suffering pertains more towards the soul of individuals as they're reincarnated. As such, spiritual suffering does have a clearly defined metric, whereas material suffering does not. Okay. Just going now into the case.
Extend the fourth and fifth.
Okay, sorry. Extend the fourth and fifth case. Specifically, what their case bites into spiritual suffering. Again, they are likening nature to something which is to be feared or to be exploited and nothing in between. They are causing a severe disconnect between individuals and this overall state of nature around them. By doing so, they're eliminating the panpsychism and they're eliminating people from any aspect or chance of reaching the Tao. And furthermore, the exploitation of nature does not stop with them. Because people will simply say, oh, this form of exploitation of nature simply wasn't enough. It caused too much material suffering, so it wasn't worth it. They will simply turn to another means. Unless we solve our desire, we're going to continue with the exploitation of nature and the material suffering that it provides. Furthermore, they,
just go to the impact.
Yeah, okay. What?
Just go to impact level, extend second impact.
What's the impact level? Go to the impact level. They drop any argumentation as to why spiritual suffering outweighs material suffering. We give you the fact that spiritual suffering is something which can transcend material suffering and goes beyond material condition. Because spiritual suffering is able to solve better, and it is the root cause of material suffering, because it is what drives the desire that leads us to material suffering. We must solve for spiritual suffering first before we can adequately provide a solution for material suffering. Furthermore, they give us fear of death, and that's causing suicide. I'll tell you that at the end of the day, actually. Furthermore, they give us a fear of death throughout their round. They always talk about how people are going to be dying of these natural disasters. By doing so, they're causing the securitized violence because people will constantly desire to not die. They'll constantly desire to live a good life, and in doing so, they are going to impose this upon others. They are leading to the oppression because of their attitude and their rhetoric is giving us more oppression than status quo.
Okay. Go to the all. Just cross apply all.
Just go to the
perm spikes.
Yeah, go to the all. Furthermore on to the all. Cross apply all the perm spikes because the rhetoric has already been into the solvency. There's no adequate perm for providing the epistemic level of people. They are already giving us fear of death through their first speech. They're giving us fear of death through their second speech. They are causing every member in this room to spiritually suffer through their rhetoric. As such, there's a terminal solvency deficit if we do the perm. Furthermore, the state advocating state action paints if the whole example of role playing. If you have the state, the most important entity in the world, that you gave up your individual agency to telling you that the most important impact in life is death, you're simply going to be causing more material suffering because people desire to not die without realizing that death is simply another state of existence.
Extend the nature solves argument and extend discourse solves.
Extend further nature solves argument and discourse solves argument. I'll take your question, please.
So why is people experiencing spiritual suffering cause them to oppress other people?
Right, because spiritual suffering causes us desire, and as long as the desire manifests itself as material suffering, we're going to want to securitize for ourselves the best material conditions and the most comfort available. Because we live in a world that is finite, we're going to end up externalizing this upon others, especially through fear of death, because we want to get rid of the things which they say are going to cause us to die.
Yeah, like capitalism makes us like try to get more means
And
of
look at like
production.
like capitalism, like how wars are waged. People are waged wars because they're afraid of dying, because they want to make sure they want to live the longest. But either way, they're going to fail in this objective in the end. It's a completely futile goal, and the only way we can actually solve for this is if we address the issue at the root cause, that of being spiritual suffering. So over these, yeah.
Oh, go to the framework terms. Just extend vampirism.
Okay,
Okay, yeah, sure.
Okay, framework terms, death, vampirism, and that biting the source of probably be the cause of fear of death.
Yeah.
For those reasons, we strongly urge an education about things.
Okay. Order is going to be framework, our framework. Yeah, our framework, our solvency, and then links, and then impacts and then links. I'm gonna have alt with the alt solvency. Basically the same. Okay. Oh, no, that is framework. Starting time. Now, the affirmative has conceded that spiritual suffering is the root cause of all forms of material suffering that happen in this round, which means that even if you want to solve for all of the material impacts that the affirmative tries to present you, then you must vote for the negative because we are the gateway issue. We are the key, we control the internal link to all the solvency for material suffering. Also, conceded articulations come first, because debate is a game of articulation, which means that conceded arguments get 100% weight. Yeah.
The argument that conceded arguments come first is a new argument that should have been made in constructive speech. That's not weighing. It's not like looking at the different types of impacts.
We made it a weighing argument, which is like a way to look at different arguments. It's like impact calculus, right? So like, does magnitude come first, or like do conceded arguments come first? It's like a weighing argument. Yeah. Okay. Anyways, conceding time. Now, okay, we're not going to be denying that all the material suffering impacts are good goals. That's not the point of the K. The point of the K is to say that having these sorts of material desires and looking at them through a policy-making lens and looking at them through the lens that the affirmative takes is a bad way in order to approach this tellus. Our fundamental problem here is that looking at like all these like end goals through the lens of policymaking and looking at material impacts in the way that we fetishize these material impacts is a bad way to look at these because it causes spiritual suffering within us. We indict spiritual suffering in a couple ways. First is that spiritual suffering is eternal. They have conceded articulation that reincarnation is real, which means that spiritual suffering means that you will always infinitely materially suffer if you don't solve for spiritual suffering first. They also concede articulation talking about how in the past, like things like, okay, well, this is not an impact sheet, but you can classify it here. They also see articulation on things like toxic masculinity, whereby we try to become the most manliest man, but that's fundamentally impossible goal, so we become toxic masculine. They can see articulation that we invaded rock on the very minuscule risk that the WMD is because we fear death so much, and we fear these uncontrollable things so much that we are willing to invade and destroy other nations to do so. They have also conceded articulation where we, wait, sorry, hold on, I lost the impact sheet. Oh yeah, we also concede like things that material desires drives ecological destruction, which means that the affirmative will never be able to actually solve for the issues that they are talking about, which means that the only risk of solvency that you have here is on the negative side. Now go to solvency. Okay. Just really quickly on the perm, they concede all 4 perm spikes. We would say that probably outweighs here because we say that the affirmative is fundamentally state action, which means that the perm will never actually go through. They never give us any specific articulation as to why the perm is theoretically legitimate or a specific perm text, which means that you don't buy it. Okay. Then go to solvency. So Andrew extends 2 articulations. First is that nature solves, which means that we have empirical solvency that things will inevitably get better. We try to say that this is the better way to approach how you solve for things in the real world because it's empirically proven they provide no response here. We also say that discourse solves. Even if you don't buy that Taoism is a legitimate way, this is the only way by which we can explore it is to vote for the negative because you encourage everyone who's watching this round, everyone who's looking at this round, everyone at the TOC to actually explore this argumentation, which means that this is the only way to actually be able to truth test Taoism. Also, yeah, they have conceded all the solvency, which means that you probably vote for the negative on a marginal solvency increase because like we have defense on their level, which means that you vote for conceded offense first. Okay, on the impact level, they concede the second impact where we tell that spiritual suffering outweighs material suffering, which means that even if we lose the internal link that spiritual suffering does not necessarily control material suffering, which even though they have conceded that, we have also said that solving for spiritual suffering is that spiritual suffering just straight up outweighs material suffering, which means that I mean, you look towards that first when you're evaluating this round, you look to the negative first when you're evaluating this round. Also, just extend the third and fourth impacts where we tell you that, where we give you very specific warnings where spiritual suffering is inherently the internal link to control, to like things like oppression and the things that they want to actually try to solve for. On the link level, they say that they're decreasing the likelihood that these things are happening long term, but Andrew makes the response that like death is fundamentally double blind, so it doesn't really matter. And secondly, we will never be able to actually solve for these unless we vote for the negative first, which means that voting for the negative is uniquely key in this round. Is a TOC, right? So like, oh yeah. Also, really quick on Psalm C, they can see the articulation that TOC is fundamentally a methods debate. So this debate basically comes down to whether or not you should solve for spiritual suffering or whether or not you should solve for material suffering as your primary mechanism for your end telos, which means that you always look towards the negative first because they have so many conceded articulations. They say that the state is immense power. The only way to prevent the state from ever becoming an immense power again is to produce a Taoist lens. Just really quickly on the framing thing on ivory tower arguments. One, we solve back by voting for the negative because we increase discussion, which means that this is uniquely how you increase literature access, and also we extend the articulation that policymaking has never solved in the past.
Okay, so my order is AF framework on top, the advantage to environment, and then native advantage 1, and then their framework on top, like the K in order. Okay. Everyone ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Starting time. Now, they completely concede our framework about why you should be preferring policy framing, about how it's better to divide the ground in the round fairly, and how they're completely like muting my first speech. In addition to this, throughout their entire speech, they completely ignore the voices of all natives and all their spiritual suffering. So we're going to see is that policy action is the best way, because they say that like we can just ignore these things. We can ignore like these issues and it will solve itself on we can get rid of spiritual suffering. We're seeing is that we're not going to be able to get spiritual suffering away in like this debate round, and the most portable impact is going to be education, and the best way to get that is through this policy option, which goes conceded out of my partner's speech, and they completely ignore it throughout the neg block, meaning that since education is the reason why like we come here to debate, you're going to want to be weighing this on top of why.
Order. Any articulation as to why education is the primary argument that you're going to be looking at today's round, like definitely should have either come attached to like this theoretical argument, I guess, or have been like some form of weighing as to why education is the first thing that you look towards.
My partner brings up about how education is like an important part of debate, and how you get more education by debating instead of like getting ivory tower arguments, but it's okay. Okay, so what we're going to be seeing is that they also concede that like this is a policy round because of an actor, and since there's no actual actor throughout their alt, and like the role of the ballot isn't actually going to solve for spiritual suffering, you're going to want to be preferring a policy action through the affirmative. They also drop all the framers' intent thing, which is like also key to like education, and like otherwise we're gonna lose who's writing like these resolutions. They ruin debate without resolutions, and they're like pushing people away from writing them if they just completely ignore them. Okay, and they like ignore all our advantages. So advantage 2 about the environment, you're gonna extend all of our environmental impacts, which are this is also leading to spiritual suffering. Okay, on to my advantage 1 about natives. The most important part and where this debate is going to come down to is about how they completely ignore the deep connection that like natives have to their land, and how they are having spiritual suffering right now, and there's no way that they're going to be able to solve for spiritual suffering in this round, even if people debate this in a lot of other rounds. This isn't like applicable to all resolutions, and it's not going to be something that you are going to be able to solve through like this discussion. The best thing is to like have like these real world policy things so that we can learn how we're going to go vote in the future. We can try to minimize the amount of suffering that like these natives are having. So we're going to extend all the impacts on this, and I'll get more onto that when I get into their framing right now, why you should be preferring the suffering of natives and like the material suffering that was occurring. So you can say that spiritual suffering is the root of all suffering. What we're seeing is that like the native suffering like once again is being ignored, and we can actually by debating these options can be like thinking about how we can better improve this, also destroying native souls by destroying their interconnection to their land and their spirituality. For like example, boarding schools are like re-educated people. Okay, their entire like critique. Is re-educating native people like against like what they want to believe in, like
point of order, like any articulation that Taoism is a form of re-education, like or whatever that sort of articulation, that definitely should have came out of the 2AC. Like we don't have like re-education anywhere on the floor.
We didn't talk about education, but
you're destroying the native spirituality.
We've made the argument that you're ignoring the native spirituality, and their education is part of their spirituality.
Well, no, re-education is just another word for that.
Re-education is another word for that. Okay, it's panel. Okay, going on. Okay, they say that violence is caused by spiritual suffering, but they're saying that they don't solve for spiritual suffering, because there's no way to minimize the violence and suffering that's happening to these natives and through the discussion that they're bringing up. It's better to debate these policy options. Also, they talk about reforming the political so we can adapt. People can adapt how they want it to be and make it. When I talk about ceding the political, but that it allows for bad people to adopt whatever they want and swoop in, especially when the people who are implementing the things that the natives want are just stepping out and completely ignoring it. This shows this shows what policymakers are doing, even in this own round at the TOC. They're completely ignoring all discussion of natives and just discussing what they want to discuss, even though this is a systematic problem that continues to occur.
You can see that you have to remove yourself from the state in order to get Taoism internalized within yourself. So there's going to at least be a delay time when the political has been seeded.
Okay, also they completely ignore about how because you have to go through this, you have to leave the state for a little bit in order for this to happen. There's going to be a little bit of time where
there's a delay where it's going to be the people who are oppressing and not.
Okay, there's going to be a delay where the people who are oppressing are going to come into control when the state is out of control, and then it's going to lead to more spiritual suffering. Okay, so it creates. They also they talk about we must look to Taoism and look through it, but this creates an unachievable perfect state of man actually by saying that we must look through something else and this. But they're not actually going to be able to solve for this, and they just essentially make it so that the state is inevitable and they can't actually solve for any of these things. So you're going to extend authenticity fetish. Also, they say we're not how can you on the rule of the ballot? They said how can you say who the best adequate debater is in this round? We're seeing is that just spirituality is subjective into the surveys that they had and how people answered that they they have memories from the afterlife is going to be just as subjective as who is the best debater. Also one person suffering or saying suffering is hard to weigh, just how you can weigh these material impacts. You should be weighing material impacts first because it's going to be the best thing for understanding who's winning at the end of the day. Also they talk about fear of suffering and death, but people should not decide for others if they care to die. And also, in addition to this, what we're going to be seeing on the links, also they're ignoring these discussions of natives, so they can't actually solve for any of the spiritual suffering at the end of the day. Extend the term.
Good round.
A round of that.
Oh, we don't shake hands
Oh,
today.
oh.
Debate tournaments are cesspools of genius.
Yeah, that's fair.
Is it okay if we eat in here? We get to eat lunch.
I will defer to the tournament host.
Yeah, as long as you bring everything out with you.
Okay, cool. Probably do something. We have to eat in hours.
Mine or the rest of them?
Yeah, good.
Which Wi-Fi network is better, events or public?
It's events.
Okay. James, decision.
Oh, yeah.
You should submit the decision before taking it to the ballot.
Oh.
Your partner is coming back, right?
Yeah, he's been feeling nauseous, so I think he's throwing up.
You don't want to check in on him?
I mean, he's been doing it all day. He says he's fine whenever I ask.
Debaters are the worst when it comes to personal health. Jesus.
And that's all on the record.
Oh yeah, it's important.
Forgot about that part.
Definitely need to remember not to swear when you're empty.
I will say his suffering is subjective.
I've been told that it's all subjective.
No, not at all.
Alright. We have the decision. The decision was 3-0 for the affirmative from Ashland High School. Would any of the judges like to speak first?
I mean, I think I'll keep mine super short and sweet because I'm sure we'll get into the nitty gritties. I think we all probably saw the debate pretty similarly. So essentially, the neg makes a statement of, you know, we are reforming the state. We must solve for spiritual suffering. I completely buy the asked response that you don't indeed solve for that suffering and that you don't fulfill the obligation that you yourself brought on. So super short and sweet. The other thing that I'll say, and this had no bearing at all in my decision-making calculus, my own teams have run Taoist critiques, Buddhist critiques, and this is an intellectual exercise, so I get it. And again, this has nothing to do with my decision, but I do, just as someone in the audience, I do wonder and think about what does it mean when we use people's religious beliefs to make arguments. And again, I don't mean to make any assumptions about what your belief system is or, you know, whatever, what have you, but I don't know, there's something about it for me that's very uncomfortable. And again, it had nothing to do with my decision at the end of the day, but I just wonder if as a community we should be thinking about what does it mean if we are using Taoist or Buddhist critiques, which yes, force us to think about issues from a different angle, but then at the same time it's like, are we kind of exploiting these ideas for a W in round when essentially your whole case is about spiritual suffering. I'm wondering, is that actually causing, and again, nothing to do with my decision-making calculus, but I wonder, is that actually causing some spiritual suffering for someone who maybe isn't an actual Taoist and is going to watch this round? So again, nothing to do with my decision-making calculus, but that is something I've been thinking about all year that really makes me uncomfortable, and maybe, in a future forum, you all will have that discussion. I don't know if that's something you all are thinking about too.
All right. Well, I would like to echo Akuna's thoughts. I definitely think that's a valid concern for the neg. I have a somewhat similar, perhaps, concern for the AF, although it also didn't factor into my decision because it wasn't really brought up in the round. I feel like just saying that Native people are special and they have this special connection to land seems a little centralizing to me. But going on why I voted, I really did not get the sense that you read my paradigm, which in two separate places, first of all says, I will not vote on blips. Almost all of your arguments are blips. You're making multiple claims with backing them up either with no warrants whatsoever or warrants that are so underexplained as to functionally be non-existent. And then I go more specifically in my paradigm and I say reading a K does not exempt you from the need to read quality warrants. So here is how this plays out in the round. So I look at the role of the ballot that you were suggesting, which says that my role is to be a Taoist sage. You then don't really explain what that would entail. I'm also not sure why a Taoist sage would ever judge a debate tournament, but here I am. And the best that I can understand, it means that I should be weighing spiritual violence over material violence. I don't really get a clear explanation of what spiritual violence is. The closest that I get is that it's some kind of violence that transcends reincarnation, but the AF tells me that you have no warrant, or at least no warrant that is understandable to me of why reincarnation exists, other than some unnamed study at some point said that someone remembered something from past life, but I don't count that as a warrant that's nearly quality enough for me to actually vote on. So at that point, I don't exactly know what spiritual violence means, which means that when the affirmative tries to garner that impact by saying, well, what about the spiritual violence of the Native people who have to drink poisoned water? I'm thinking, given that that impact was so poorly defined, if they want to take it for themselves, I will give them a lot of leeway on that. I think that the affirmative had a much cleaner way of winning the round, which is in the member speech, you're making the argument that material violence comes first because we cannot think through these sort of ivory tower arguments if we have just drank poisoned water and are now in the hospital. We can't really think about reincarnation when that is happening. That is a far more persuasive argument than anything that you're actually going for in the rebuttal speech. I feel like you are overly reliant on just kind of blocks that you've prepared, and you're like, oh, they read Ks, let's read or see the political block. And instead of doing that, just listen to their K, think about what their key arguments are, and then just make a couple really intuitive arguments for why their arguments don't apply. And you do that, but then you don't go for these arguments and fall back on your blocks. Nonetheless, I think the extension of the violence against natives impact is something that is the cleanest thing for me to vote on, so I also vote after.
Yeah, it seems to be a fairly consistent theme. So just the specific things for me are that when I'm evaluating the framework of whether I should vote for the best policy option or vote for the role of the Taoist sage, there's like multiple competing arguments from each side that are not answered by the other, so I get to freely weigh whatever the hell I want for framework, which is probably not something you want to happen if you're reading a K, especially if you're reading a K where one of your framework arguments is that reality doesn't exist. You probably need to be cleanly winning framework and answering every argument against it, because if that central claim goes away, then your concept of spiritual suffering doesn't make sense in the context of the round. I think that the key thing for me was that y'all just straight dropped the entire app, like framing and all, which is probably bad because it means they get free reign for extensions in both the 2AC and the PR. Then you drop your framework, your 2 framework terms, which are basically reiterations of arguments on the framework of the criticism in the block, and neither of you gets to it on time during those 2 speeches. I think that the authenticity fetish argument nukes your solvency, because if we are always seeking to achieve a perfect form of being, which is impossible, like you don't answer the argument that it is impossible to achieve that perfect form of being, which means that there's going to be a massive indict to your mode of solvency because it relies on being able to check back for your own prioritization of this stage of life over others, right? I think that the argument that like there is unnecessary material suffering sort of indicts a lot of your other sort of claims about you keep extending that suffering is inevitable and that spiritual suffering is the root cause of all material suffering. But the app is clearly identifying a few scenarios where it's like completely unnecessary and exists solely because of existing problems in policy that can be solved. Then gives me warrants as to how policy education spills over through the thing about gun control, which I'm not sure is even true, but y'all don't contest it. And the argument about like natives in Congress, and also I think that y'all just should have pounded them more on native spirituality should be prioritized over Eastern spirituality, because guess whose land we stole and are living on, right? Like I would go ham for that in the PMR, because not only should be prioritize native spirituality over Eastern spirituality because it's more proximal, you should prioritize it because the entire existence of the state is a crime against the native people, and so that is our first ethical obligation, is to check back for the violence of settler colonialism. At least that's how I would frame it in the 2AC and the rebuttals. Any questions?
That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck, guys.
I have not
Thank
squirreled
you.
a single time this tournament.
Yes.
Holy